So we finished talking about the bouncing ball and animating the bouncing ball. This next lesson is going to be about rigging, and more importantly, it's going to be about a more broad overview of the entire process of 3D in general. And so this one is less about you following along and more about you just listening and sort of understanding. And you can follow along and do this tutorial as well. But it's mostly just an understanding. I don't want you to get overwhelmed because it sort of deviates a little bit from animation. But I want to give an overview so that we understand what's going on behind the scenes. So the whole pipeline of 3D, it starts with modeling. So I have examples up here of modeling, and modeling is just simply creating what's called a 3D mesh. It's just creating the model, only the model, and once you have the model created, it can't do anything. It's just a model, right? But once you have the model created, you then need to you need to rig it, and the modelers are also responsible for, or oftentimes are responsible for texturing as well. So to make it more simple, start with the model, and then to color it or to texture it would be the next step. So here's some examples of texturing. So you have the model and then some texture maps up here. Again, don't feel you need to study this deeply. I'm just giving an overview. This eye here without a texture would just be a sphere, right? So just giving some ideas here. Here's a texture map of a monkey with a texture map on him. So after modeling goes to texturing to color it. Then comes rigging, and rigging is all the controls put on the character. Without these controls, the character couldn't do anything. It'd just be a model, and that's it. So each one of these steps is an entire career in itself. You can literally spend your entire life, your entire career, just doing one of these steps. So after rigging comes animation, which we've already talked about. And just some examples there. And after animation, basically goes to rendering, where it makes it look all nice and snazzy and super cool looking, and this could take a really long time to render something out. Here's an entire environment rendered in Maya. This render here, depending on your computer speed, I mean, it could take hours just for one frame to render. And then remember that one frame is 1/24th of a second. So if it takes 1 hour to render one frame and you have 1 second of animation, then it's going to take you an entire day to render 1 second of animation. So there's a lot of going into rendering as well. So each one of these is their own respectful career path in itself. Today, so in this lesson, we are going to talk about just rigging, and I'm going to show you some rigging. How something is rigged, and this is the most basic aspect of rigging, and it's good for us to know. If you want to be a rigger, then that is a very strong path to take, but we're not going to get deep into that right now. All right, so to start with this lesson, I'm going to create a cylinder, and then I'm going to resize the cylinder by making it, let's make it a height of 15 units. And then let's also add a subdivision. So right now what I'm doing is basically modeling. This is the modeling step. I'm actually going to go into my side view, and I'm going to go into wireframe mode by pressing the number 4 on the keyboard, just so I can see this better. And I'm going to resize to 15. The height is 15. And then I'm going to add a subdivision here, just one. So I added a subdivision in the middle. You see this line in the middle that wasn't there before. So that's what I did. So when that is how I like it, I'm going to delete transforms. Don't worry about what this means. Delete the history. This just means that I'm telling the computer, I don't want to make any more changes to this, essentially. And this is ready to be rigged. So when this is created, what I'm going to do is create what's called bones. or skeleton joints. So I do that by going into the rigging interface here. So on the top left corner you have this drop down that says modeling or rigging. All this does is change the drop down menus at the very top. So that's all that does. So I'm going to go into rigging so that I can see my skeleton drop down here. And I'm going to create joints. So this is going to almost be like an arm. I'm just going to imagine this being like somebody's arm. So I'm going to start by creating a joint at the very top of the cylinder. And then I'm going to create another joint in the middle where I created the subdivision. And then end it at the very end of this arm, this cylinder. And then press Q on the keyboard to clear the palette. So now I've got this joint chain, and this joint chain is not connected to the cylinder at all. It's just a joint chain that if you were to render this, you would not see the joint chain. It's just sort of a behind-the-scenes thing. So in order to make this talk to the cylinder, you need to bind the skin. So what that means to bind the skin, this 3D model, this mesh here, has basically all these individual points on it. So it's called a vertice. So, oops. Let me do vertex. So each one of these little points is a vertice, and you can pull out. This is how modelers like model and sculpt something in 3D the way they want it, is to pull the vertices or the vertex. And you need the compilation of this model is called basically the skin, and so you want to attach the skin to the joints, and you do that by going to let me bring this up. I'm going to go to skin, bind skin. I'm going to bring up the options menu, and what you have to do is select the mesh first, then shift select the top bone chain, and then click apply for bind skin. And what this is going to do is and I have the max influences to 2. What that means is every vertex on this model will not be affected by any more than 2 joints. So if I had like 5 joints here in this chain, it would only be a max have a max effect of 2. Again, don't worry about all the technical understanding everything. Just know that what I did was I bound the mesh to the joints. So now they're talking to each other. So now when I move the joints, the mesh is like, oh, okay, I need to move with it. So that's just creating the joint chain, and then creating the mesh, then creating the joint chain, and then binding them together. The next thing I want to do is create this becomes like, for an animator, it's not really feasible to just select the joints and animate the joints. So what you have to do is select controls for the joints. So what I'm going to do is create a NURBS primitive circle. That's going to create a circle in the middle here. I'm just going to scale it up. I'm going to again delete the history, and I'm going to freeze transforms. Again, don't worry about understanding what that means. But what I'm going to do with this control is move it to the top of the joint chain. So what I did there was, with the circle selected, I press W on the keyboard to switch to translation mode, and hold down V, letter V, and it'll snap to the closest point. So this is snapped to where the top of the joint is, and what we need to do now is have this joint be constrained to this control, because when I move, what I want to do is when I move this control, the joint moves with it. And since there are 2 joints here, I'm going to have 2 controls. So let me duplicate this and move this down. Again, let me make sure everything is frozen. Freeze the transforms. And then I'm going to make this make these circles talk to each other. So basically when I move this circle, I need the circle below it to move with it, and you do this by parenting. So this second circle is going to be a child of the first circle, or what's called parenting. So this first circle will be a parent. And I'll just do that in the outliner by moving moving the second underneath the first. So now these are talking to each other, so you see that working. Now we need the joints to talk to the circles as well. And what I'm going to do is constrain this, which is similar to parenting. Very similar, but there are differences. I'm going to constrain this by selecting the circle first and then shift selecting the bone and then click apply. The second one, I'll select the circle, shift select the second bone and click apply. So now both of these should be talking to each other. There you go. Alright, so this is a rigged, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it an arm. So this is looking cool, looking the way I want it. And now this is essentially, again, this is very, very basic and simple, but essentially this is ready to start animating. And you can actually do this. I will actually put this file in the lesson, so you could see this file. In fact, let me go ahead and save this. I'll just save it to my desktop. I'm going to call it arm rig. So you guys will be able to download this and see exactly what I see here. And what I'm going to do is go to my animation layouts, which we talked about in previous lessons. So I'm going to do 2 pane stacked and then create a graph editor down here. And what I want to do is start animating this. So I'm going to save a key on frame 1. Let's make this 30 frames long. And frames 30, and then frame 15, I'm going to save another key because that's the middle point. Actually, this should be 0 at the starting point. So let's just animate this. Let's say this goes back at this point, and then forward at this point. And save the key at the beginning and middle mouse click over to the end and press S to save it. So the beginning and the end are the same. So now this is moving. Let's go ahead and add an offset. Offset by setting the curves to pre-infinity cycle. In fact, let me show you what infinity does. I'm going to turn infinity on so you can see before and after. You see these extra sort of dimmed lines. When I turn infinity on, you'll see this cycle. So curves pre-infinity cycle. So you see how that cycled. Curves post-infinity cycle. And let me just move this, I don't know, 3 or 4 frames. And then you can play that. And now you have a rotating arm. So it's important as animators to understand how rigging works. You do not need to be an expert rigger, but you just need to know what's going on behind the scenes so you can understand your character better and your model better and how all of this fits together. And especially if there's anything wrong with the rig, you can tell if something's wrong, and then you can talk to the rigger and figure things out. So it's a good overview to understand this. You do not need to be a good rigger, but you just need to understand it. So that's going to be it for this lesson. The next lesson is going to be, let's take a look, the actual animating the actual dragon. So this is going to be a big step next, and I'm looking forward to it. I'll see you guys there. Thanks.